this detail here is probably one of the biggest revelations that's actually come out of this entire thing, this whole trial, because you have this guy, and this is the MPD Lieutenant Johnny Mercil, and he's a use of force trainer. Okay, so this was the prosecution brought this guy up as a witness, by the way. Okay, so he works in the MPD training division in charge of use of force training and policy instruction. He was active or at least in that capacity, during the period preceding the Floyd events, during which Chauvin would have received his department use of force training and policy instruction, which is why this guy is relevant. So it would have been his training and his policies that were in place during Chauvin's active duty and during this actual incident, okay? So Mercil is the prosecutor's witness, and Eric Nelson is Derek Chauvin's attorney, just so we have an idea of what's going on here. So this is what happened when Nelson cross-examined Mercil. This is what typically happens. The prosecution brings forward a witness, and then that witness can be cross-examined. They can be asked questions directly from the defense as well, and that is what I'm going to be going through a bit here. So here's some of the dialogue and the situation of what happened. This is all, by the way, able to be found on legalinsurrection.com. They're mainly covering this story, and I'm just kind of going through some of the most important sections of what took place here with this guy. So once again, this dialogue is specifically between Derek Chauvin's attorney, the defense, basically cross-examining, questioning this use of force trainer that the prosecution brought forth as a witness that they would assume, obviously, if he was brought forth as a witness from the prosecution, that he would somehow in some way help their case. But in this case, it actually wound up backfiring in a major, major way. So let's get into this. So basically, as noted, Nelson also explored with Mercil whether there were circumstances in which it would be appropriate for an officer to maintain a neck restraint for a substantial period of time. And Mercil conceded that there were. So that's check one mark off the list there, where there are circumstances where you're going to need to restrain somebody past that time. And this guy that's doing the training, remember, this Mercil guy is the training, use of force, policy person, and all of that, okay? He then goes on, and so it says, sometimes to maintain the neck restraint for however long it took EMS to arrive, asked Nelson, and that was the question Nelson asked to Mercil. And Mercil answered that he personally had maintained restraint on suspects for the duration required for EMS to arrive. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but I was a 911 dispatcher for about almost 2 years. My dad was in law enforcement as well, but this happened all the time. Whenever there was a situation where somebody had some type of medical condition or something like that, EMS, firefighters, all of them had to basically stage in a kind of a holding area, maybe a block or two away from the incident, so that police could basically get the situation under control. This is important because EMS firefighters do not have guns. They don't have the training to deal with grappling people that are resisting arrest. They don't have the training for that. So when you have these types of situations that are going on, it's always something that happens. The EMS fire, they always stage in a situation that you have here. So the idea is that George Floyd had to be restrained in order for the situation to be gotten under control. That was what the police officer felt like needed to happen. And EMS and firefighters can't administer aid to George Floyd until they realize or figure out that the situation has been mitigated, that he's not resisting arrest and not lying and doing all the rest of this stuff, as well, by the way, as the bystanders, the people that are standing around in the crowd as well. That's something to take into consideration. So it goes on to ensure the point. The state's own use of force expert testified on cross-examination that he personally had engaged in use of force conduct that the state had been using to demonize Chauvin as an unlawful killer. That's not a good day for the state. So that's one of the big kind of check marks as well in this situation. So Nelson also, again, re-emphasized the reality that the officer involved in a use of force event must consider not just the suspect, but also the presence of an angry and growing mob observing what might look like as an ugly use of police force, and Mercil agreed that that was the case. So once again, the crowd matters. It's not just the state of George Floyd, but the state of all of these people that are upset, that are cursing at the officer, things like that. They're going to say, hey, we're not going to bring EMS into this because this crowd is dangerous as well. So it goes on the issue of providing timely medical care, an issue the state pushes with particular energy. Nelson had Mercer agree that while MPD policy is to provide care as soon as possible, that must also take into consideration the safety of the scene, and that the MPD policy actually requires that it first be safe for the officer to provide care before the officer has the duty to provide that care. Indeed, factors such as whether a suspect had just been fighting with the officers was huge in determining whether an officer could reasonably provide care, especially if that care would be chest compressions, which would require that the suspect have their handcuffs removed. So Mercer answered in the affirmative, agreeing with those statements there. It goes on to say, it was at that point that Nelson showed Mercer a series of photographs captured from the body-worn camera of Officer Lane and showing Chauvin's knee on Floyd from the angle down on Floyd's prone body. Now, the reason why this is important is because I covered this in a separate video. It wasn't in the show. But there was a different angle from the police officer, Officer Lane's position. He was right by Derek Chauvin during the restraining position of George Floyd. And you could actually see from that angle, his knee wasn't on his neck at all, at least for a significant period of time. It was actually on his shoulder blade, which is once again, throws a humongous wrench, a massive hole in this knee on the neck narrative. They want to keep pushing this over and over again. Knee on the neck, knee on the neck, knee on the neck. However, we're continually getting more information that shows that his knee was probably not on his neck at all, actually. So that's what he's actually referring to here in these pictures that he's showing him. So basically what he's going on to do is talk about the situation with these photographs. And he says, are there circumstances like those already discussed where it would be appropriate to maintain a presence on the leg across the shoulder blades and the back in order to ensure control of the suspect? And the Mercer answered, yes, it is. And then he asked for as long as 10 minutes. And then Mercer also said it is possible. In other words, the use of the restraint can be justified not only to compel compliance of the suspect in the first place, but to ensure that the suspect maintains compliance moving forward, obviously. And that's not just for the safety of the officer, but also for the safety of the officer's partners, for the bystanders, and even for the suspect themselves. That it's for their own good, in other words. So all of this stuff basically winds up throwing a massive, massive hole into the prosecution's case, because the guy that they brought forward as a witness did such a bad part, I guess, a bad job at proving the prosecution's case, and really sided so much more with what the defense has been saying so much in this entire situation, that they actually were literally trying to recall that witness. Like, hey, we don't want you back anymore. And actually what might wind up happening is the defense might wind up taking on this witness, and he just winds up switching sides, because this witness basically was showing the facts, showing what actually was taking place, and the prosecution was mad. They were mad because none of the stuff that he was saying was what they wanted him to say. So that's a pretty big development there as well. Another thing that we have to take into consideration, for example, is just some of the numbers we've seen over the last year. There's been a 33% increase in homicides just over the last year. Now, the reports that I've read on this, CNN was the one reporting this initially. Of course, they're going to come out and say, well, there's nothing to really point to. It's just the way things are. But come on. I mean, let's look at this realistically here. Crimes are going up because police officers can't do their jobs, and criminals know that. Criminals know that they can get away with just about anything they want to get away with right now, generally speaking, within reason in some of these areas, and that police officers are limited in what they can do. And when police officers are less respected, when they're limited in what they can do, especially to restrain people, and they're worried about maybe losing their entire livelihood and being shamed for the rest of their life no matter what they do, they're not very apt to do their job very well, basically. Criminals know that, and they're taking advantage of it, and it's happening in all of these major cities. So actually 63 out of the 66 largest police jurisdictions saw increases in at least one category of violent crimes in 2020, which include homicide, robbery, aggravated assault, among others as well. You don't think that this has anything to do with the fact that they are demonizing police every single day? I mean, police are afraid to do their job. It's obvious. You just watched a clip from the William Hall Show. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.